Hey guys, so I want to start this video with a anecdote that happened to me yesterday. Something that happened to me yesterday at the gym that I think showcases very well the point of this video. So yesterday at the gym, I was with one of my athletes and I was helping her out, figuring out how to do a handstand kick, which is that movement in which you go from standing and then you go upside down against the wall and you end up doing a handstand hold against the wall. So it's a very challenging move for the vast majority of the people. And she was just trying there and she was learning, right? So she's in that point in which she doesn't really need a lot of coaching. She just needs more practice till she finds it. Like no amount of rational explanation is gonna really help her that much. She has all the basics and she has to figure out how hard to push with one leg and how to manage balance. And those are things that like don't need cues. Those are things that needs a little bit of work. So I was there just to coach her through, even if she doesn't need much more than support, right? And maybe a little bit of physical cues to help her find some of that balance. But some of my other athletes see her learning process as a struggle, so naturally they want to help. And so in isolated cases, one of them came and gave her some advice while I was there. And usually I have my strategies that my athletes don't notice how to cut that, because I usually don't. I have found out that well-intended advice from other athletes is usually very unproductive. So I have my tactics to deviate that kind of behavior, but this one was not gonna hurt, so I was letting it play. And the interesting thing that I noticed is that 3 different people came in 3 different occasions yesterday and gave my athlete 3 different advices, all good in the sense that those were things that have worked for them, but they were all contradictory. So one person told her to walk the hands very close to the wall, and the other person told her to actually walk the hands very far away from the wall, and one person told her to like have the foot on the ground, and the other person have the foot in the air, and so on. And so my athlete looked at me and she's clearly confused, because now like she has 3 pieces of advice that are all contradictory and they're all well intended. And like I look at her and I told her, like, let's keep focusing on what you were doing and try to find it yourself. Like what you are doing is fine. But that look of confusion is exactly how I feel most of us feel in the nutritional world, right? So all the time you'll find both friends in real life and in the digital world. Maybe at Thanksgiving dinner, you'll find your friend that is vegetarian, you have a friend that is keto, you have a friend that is vegan, you have a friend that tried paleo, you had a friend that tried a Whole30, you had a friend that tried the potato diet, and like all of them have this approach that has worked for them, and because it has worked for them, it becomes the right way to go. And this kind of generalization is very unconscious, right? For most people. And so if most people find something that works for them, it automatically becomes the thing to do. And just like my athletes that were doing that were giving advice on handstand, they failed to see, because they can only look at their experience, they failed to see how what they're proposing doesn't work for the other person, right? Like they just don't have enough a sample size big enough. They don't see that like having the hands away from the wall work well because you're very tall, your anatomy is a certain way, but you're very short, and so hands are closer to the wall for you, and so on, right? And so the same happens with nutrition. Good. So what I want to talk today, though, is about the following. There's the problem that we have there is that all those beliefs have an underlying assumption, and it is that there's such a thing as the way to go. This is what works. And for some people that is very conscious, and for some people that is very unconscious. And the problem is, on the internet you'll find a lot of articles and like pieces of information, videos and so on, that come from that assumption. There is such a thing as the best diet. This is how you should eat. And that is a very strong assumption that assumes that we all, just because we're human, we all in general should have a particular kind of diet, which we all will respond to this in the same way, right? Okay, that is problematic. And if you have followed me for a while, you'll know that I think that nutrition is personal, which is also another generalization. Let's be real. The point of today's video is about this. The truth, of course, or reality is always more complicated than how we think it is, right? We're always limited by our understanding, and so there are, just like in the handstand example, there are certain principles of nutrition that apply to us all, but there are also certain things that are completely personal and that don't apply to us all. And so today I want to talk to you about the personal aspect, the personal aspects of nutrition. In particular, your response, your sugar response to certain foods. I'm going to bring an article that I found very interesting that deals with this topic. And I want to show you how this article and the experiment that the authors of the article ran showcases how sugar, the response of your body to different foods is very, very personal, and it's gonna be very interesting. Before we dive into this, I want to make one disclosure. So, if you are a person watching this video, and you're thinking that mustache is very interesting, you're right. Also, it's in a weird stage, but that's not the point. Sorry, I deviate. So, if you're a person watching to this video and you're trying to better your diet, the first thing you need to know is that no matter what the internet say, I'm positive that you have one big thing that you can work on right now that will make your diet better, and you don't need any studies. You don't need any particularities, any specificities, right? You don't need to care too much about your glycemic response to particular foods. The discussion that I'm gonna have is specific. But if you're a person trying to eat better, you know what you need to do. Maybe that is eat more veggies. Maybe that is eat less processed foods. Maybe that is don't drink so much soda. You'll find something that is a big picture intervention that is gonna be really good for you, and you don't have to worry about keto or vegetarianism or anything like that, because the big changes to our diet you were taught in school, and you should be able to make them. Once you have a very stable diet that looks good to you, then you can start playing with the details. I just wanted to make that safety there. Okay, so now let's talk about personal nutrition, and in particular about the glycemic response. So, regardless of who you are, and if you are Uncle Robert and love keto, or you are your friend Julian and you're a vegan, while most people, the point in which you will get no debate is that we know that having an elevated blood sugar is not a good thing, right? And having chronically elevated blood sugar is not a good thing. Our body doesn't like to have high blood sugar. It's a threatening context. It's a threatening condition, and if you have elevated blood sugar for a long period of time, we know that leads to the set of conditions that we have coined under the term metabolic syndrome, which include obesity, high blood pressure, non-alcoholic fatty liver, and so on and so forth. And so that is one of those things in nutrition that, we know chronic high blood sugar is not a good thing. And we also know that the number one predictor of blood sugar levels is what you eat, right? Like, the blood sugar depends highly on what you eat. And so naturally, if you're thinking about that problem, you want to think about what guidelines can I give people? How can I predict which foods are going to spike my sugars less or more? And can I generalize there? Like, can I give guidelines for everybody? Will bread spike the sugar for everybody equally, or will maybe sweet potatoes will, or like what will do it more or less? And so that is an interesting question. Most people will automatically jump into the conclusion that sugar should spike your sugar the most, right? Just like fat will kill you because it will clog your arteries because there's fat on your arteries, right? Like the common sense answer is very readily there. But if you're serious, we have to test this, and we have to like think about like we have to test it in different people too, right? And so what we have traditionally do until like very few years is we have used caloric content of food and carbohydrate content of food to be predictors of glycemic response. What that means is that we have done tests and measured the glycemic response of people based on the calories that they eat. And so what that allows us to do is like if we know the caloric content of a given food, like of a hot dog, you more or less can guess how much your blood sugar is gonna spike, right? And so you can give guidelines on that. And we know that caloric content is a very poor predictor, right? It's not gonna predict very well what's gonna happen to your body. And the other predictor that is a little bit more accurate, not so much more, but that is also widely used, is carbohydrate content of the meal. So depending on how much carbohydrates is in your meal, you can estimate how high your glycemic response is going to be, and that's also why the first recommendation that everybody gives is to lower your carbohydrates, right? So those are the common routes to answer this problem. Like, what should the practical problem that we're asking there is like, how can I know what to eat that doesn't spike my blood sugar levels so high, right? And so the answers using these predictors are like little calories, little carbs, right? And that's common knowledge. That is a little bit where we were. There was another indicator there or predictor there that we used to use that was very useful. That was the glycemic index, which is a little bit more a precise measure than carbohydrate consumption, in the sense that it assumes that like different carbohydrates have different responses, and so that is a little bit more of a predictor, but it got greatly criticized because I think because of the pretension of precision, people realize that like it doesn't matter if your apple has a glycemic index of 5, but you're eating it alone and you're eating it with other stuff around, that glycemic index becomes very non-meaningful, right? And so because when you eat the apple alone, it's gonna spike your sugar in a way, but when you eat that apple with peanut butter, for example, it's gonna spike it in another way. And the glycemic index cannot really predict any of those, right? Which is the same criticism that you could do with calories and carbohydrates. But anyhow, so those are the predictors that we had, and what we know is that they're okay. They're okay. They're not very good. So the article that I want to present you actually tries to solve this problem, and it does it in a fantastic way. What they want to do is like, okay, let's figure this thing out. Let's track. Let's figure out if we can create a computer algorithm that is a good predictor of glycemic response. What that means is the following: that what they want to answer is, can I create an algorithm that then you come and tell me, hey, my name is Juan, I work out this morning this amount of time, this is my regular lifestyle, this is like how I do my life, this is how I sleep, this is my stress levels, and now I'm gonna eat a hot dog, how much is my sugar gonna spike? And the algorithm will tell you 20 points. And what we want is that algorithm is very precise. And so when I eat the hot dog, it should be around 20, right? And so that's what the article solves. So these guys that wrote this article made the dream study, of course within the constraints and the practicalities of modern research, but they did an excellent study. So let me show it to you. So the first thing that they did is that they recruited an 800 people cohort. That's a lot of people. The second and cool thing that they did is that they plugged into these people continuous glucose monitoring. So they're tracking their blood sugar on real time, 24 hours a day for a week. That's awesome. Just imagine just having people agree to have a catheter there tracking your blood sugar, and so that is awesome, and that is gonna give us a very reliable data. On top of that, they were tracking all the things that we have that we know are associated with blood sugar response. So they're really trying to track all the variables. So they're taking stool samples. They're getting stool samples each day if possible. If that person didn't poop that day, well, what are you gonna do? But each day they're taking stool samples. They're taking blood tests. They're doing daily questionnaires with lifestyle, medical, the frequency of your foods, the frequency of your workouts. They're tracking all this stuff, and then they're taking all the anthropometrics. So weight, girth. I think weight and girth is mostly what they did. And then they use an app to track all the meals. So not only they have the responses, but they have all the meals that people are eating, and they did that for a week. And so what they're doing is like gathering all this data, and they have all these meals, and with this data they're gonna crunch the numbers and see like, okay, can we see patterns in blood sugar response to all the meals? They go one step forward on that, and this is the coolest part, and they're like, okay, with all this data, can we create an algorithm, a computer program, that based on this information, after that, if we get a completely random person that was not part of the study, and we have enough information of that person, if he worked out today, like the same kind of things that they knew about the people on the study, which is good enough, and we have that random person, they take you, they ask you a couple of questions, and then they ask you like, what are you gonna have for lunch? And you say like, I don't know, a hot dog. Can they, with their algorithm, predict the blood sugar rise that you will get from eating that hot dog? If they can, that would be excellent. And if they can do that very accurately, that could be excellent, because then that can become prescriptive, right? Like then they can provide you with tools on how to eat so that you keep your blood sugar low. And so once they have that main cohort and they gather the data, they do create the algorithm, and then they have a validation cohort of 100 people, different from these 800. And what they do is they test. And so they hook them up to continuous glucose monitors too. They ask all the questions, and they give them standardized meals and they test their algorithm with those standardized meals and see what happens. And once the algorithm is validated, then they go and check and do a dietary intervention with 26 people, completely random. They're not hooked to anything, and see what happens, right? And so they test it in real life. So that's a dream study. I feel like that's exactly how you and I would do it. Of course, there's 700 constraints and there's 700 things that I'm letting out, but that is kind of what we'll do. And there's of course problems. The main problem that I see is, for example, okay, 1 week might be not enough. Like, what if we tried 1 year? Because we know that nutritional interventions change the nutritional responses, and so this algorithm it might be very accurate for the first week, and then what happens, right? And so things like that. But in terms of they answer all these questions that I'm raising, but also you have constraints, but it's an excellent scenario. Good. So let me show you a couple of the results that are very interesting. So this graph is showing here how the continuous glucose tracking works. And so you'll see for participant 141, you see here all the sugar spikes for 7 days. And for example, if they take this, we magnify on zoom 4 on day 4. If we do a zoom in on day 4, you'll see that they have here the response to the standardized meal, and they have the response to lunch, dinner, and snack. And because they're tracking accurately, or like self-reported lunch, dinner, and snack, they also have that intervention, right? Good. Keep in mind that all this, the postprandial glycemic response, is how your sugar raises or decreases after a meal, postprandial. And so if in any of these pictures you see the letters PPGR, that's what it means. Anyhow, so that's how we would look for each person. That's what it means to have a continuous glucose monitor. The next thing that was cool is that because they were tracking so closely, they could analyze the macro composition of most people, and they actually found something pretty cool, and is that most people tend to eat very similarly. So fat and carbohydrates change, but protein is very stable, right? And so we do see more carbohydrate consumption than fat, but what we really see is that most people tend to eat little protein. That's an awesome finding, but like it's not very. I just wanted to show you, and I think this graph right here is very interesting if you want to check it out on the article. Anyhow, this is when it gets interesting. So here we have 4 participants: number 67, number 663, number 637, and number 358, and these are the individual glycemic responses to bread. And so what you'll see here is that the participant 139 has a very high response to bread, but participant 358 has a very shallow response to bread. This is the same bread, right? And the variation is significant, right? So for this person, the sugar is ranging from 80 to 100, which is totally normal levels. Actually normal levels that we consider normal without eating. That's pretty much where your blood sugar should sit. And for this dude here, 139, the participant 67, the race is like huge. It's like almost diabetic levels, right? And so that is very interesting. So when somebody tells you bread is bad for you, you might be like, well, I don't know. I might be participant 358, right? It might not be very nutritious, but it's certainly not bad for me, right? And so that is the first thing. And the most interesting thing is that there was variation within food, but also there was variation with the different types of foods. And like we're using carbohydrates mostly. They examine carbohydrates mostly just because, as I told you before, that's one of the main predictors that we use for glycemic responses, and so that's what they needed to evaluate. But they also track fat and so on, and I'll talk about it in a second. But if you look at this graph here, you have how two different participants respond to cookies or bananas. And so for participant 445, a banana spikes the blood sugar like crazy, and for not like crazy, just spikes it a little bit, but the cookies do nothing, like not much. And for participant 644, the cookie spikes it a little bit and the banana not so much, right? And so the cool thing is that this variability is not an isolated case. This didn't happen between these two guys. We didn't, like cherry pick these two guys. This happened throughout all the people. There was high interpersonal variability to the glycemic response to different types of carbohydrates. They say that they do see that fructose was a little bit more even, but still there was a lot of variation. And one question that you might be asking is, the same happen with fat or not fat? And the answer is like, yes, there was high interpersonal variability for all nutrients. Good. And so that is the first thing. So that alone tells you that nutrition is very, very personal in some ways, right? And in very measurable ways. This particular way, which is very important to us, it is measurable and it is personal, right? And so when people tell you like carbs are really bad and you should do only keto, you can bring this study and be like, I don't know, man, why are you telling me that carbs are bad? And most people will tell you that they raise your high blood sugar and that creates an environment or fat accumulation, and you can be like, I don't know, man. It depends on the person a little bit. Good. Second thing that is interesting there is when these guys finish their algorithm, they test it, right? And so what you see here in this picture is the dispersion graphs for different predictors. So you have here a graph in which they're using calories as the prediction tool, and that gives you a prediction rate of 0.33, which is very low, and then carbohydrate only prediction tool that gave them a 0.38. So they gave a meal to the same meal to different people, and they predicted the blood sugar spike using the number of calories. Then they predicted the blood sugar spike tracking the number of carbohydrates. Then they use their algorithm both for their validation cohort and for their main cohort. And what they found was that their prediction to like carbohydrates only, using carbohydrates to predict and using calories to predict was very low, like 0.33, and their algorithm was very high, was 0.7. And 0.7 doesn't sound that high, but take into account that that is very high theoretically, and I'll tell you why. Because this is another cool thing. When they gave, so the question is, how do we measure if our predicting tool is good? And so the first thing to do is like the first thing to consider is that your response to the same meal is not always the same, right? So I give you today a hot dog made of the same brand of sausage, made of the same brand of bread, and tomorrow I gave you the same hot dog and the same at the same time, and so on, and your response is gonna vary. And so they noticed, what they did is they tested that enough times, and they know, and what they noticed is that given the predictive capability of a previous event. So if I eat that hot dog today, and like that spikes my blood sugar to 150, and I use that fact, that event, to predict what will happen tomorrow when I eat the same hot dog, it had only a predicting power of 0.77. So that's the theoretical limit, right? Like you cannot get more precise than that, because there's a variability in your response within the same meal. That is another thing that is very important of this study, and I feel like it's often not talked enough, and is that your response from the same meal varies from day to day. And so generalizing there is very difficult. Anyhow, so the theoretical predicting capability is like around 0.77, and so their algorithm is having a predicting capability of 0.68 and 0.70 depending on the cohort they use, which is very high. So now what you saw there is exactly how we started this conversation. What worked for you doesn't necessarily works for me. However, let's go back to my initial point. So there's two routes that you could take after reading this article and the information that I got you. So the first thing that you need to figure out is, do I have a stable diet? Do my nutrition looks the way that I think is healthy? Not I, Juan, but you. Because most people know what a good diet looks like. Like if I give you two plates and I make you choose the better one for you, you will pick the better one. There's like, that is my experience. Everybody knows. And so if you're not there yet, if your diet is not stable, you're in group 1, the glycemic response is not as important. We still can use these results. So what we know is that the glycemic response is gonna be different for different foods, which means that you should have a good variety in your diet, so that like you're not hitting always the food that makes it higher, right? You're hitting all different kinds of foods. We know though that from this study and others that highly processed foods do spike your sugar more, so you want to stay on the side of less processed foods. And we know that fiber and nutritious food slow down the glycemic response. And so even though glycemic response is gonna be very different and it's gonna be fair, there's a lot of variability there. There are some principles there, and it's like make sure that your diet is stable and make sure that your diet is looks good to you. Once that, and that's very achievable. It's very, and most of the time what you realize is after you do that process, you're gonna feel awesome, and then you stop caring about food. But if you're in the group 1, do that. Now, so whole foods, lots of veggies, not so much food, like the regular stuff, the thing that is easier said than done, right? Now, let's say that you're already there and you actually care about your glycemic index. You could have a perfectly what looks like a good diet and still have elevated blood sugar, and so now we need to take a little bit care of you, or you are a self-hacker and you love to you love good science projects and you love to optimize your body. So it doesn't matter what body you're in, but let's say we start with a very stable diet. So now what you can do is, knowing that glycemic response is specific to foods and that it also varies even within the same day for different foods for you, what you should do is, if we want to optimize, is get a blood glucometer and start measuring your sugar, and do that in a very, very systematic way, right? So as soon as you wake up, before you go to bed, after each meal, immediately after each meal, 1 hour after each meal, 2 hours after each meal, and if you are up for it, 3 hours after each meal, get a spreadsheet. It's gonna be a lot of data. It's gonna get complicated, but you can do it. Get a food diary, match your food diary with your blood sugar, and start observing. And if you do this for 4 weeks, you don't need to be a data scientist to get good info. You're gonna get good info. You're gonna know if, for example, we know that apples for my wife spike their sugar like crazy and pears do nothing, which coincides with glycemic index, but for me it's the opposite, which doesn't coincide with glycemic index. So that's a fun finding, for example. And so when I need to spike my sugar because I'm going to work out really hard, I eat an apple, but when I don't need that, I just eat a pear, right? And so that kind of information is going to be very useful to you. Good. Second, the last, and so decide first in which camp you are, and if you are in this camp, make sure that your nutrition is awesome. If you're in the second camp and you want to test your blood sugar, let me know. I'll help you out. It's an awesome, fun experiment. You'll be your own scientist, and that's always an informative decision, an informative situation. Good. That is it. I hope the point of this video gets across. It's always, nutrition is personal in the sense that you have to find what works for you, but that is not a helpless road, and it doesn't mean that you cannot learn from others. Coming back to the example that I started with, when a person comes to you telling them what works for them, it usually comes in the form of, you should try this. This is the thing that works. Don't let their well-intended need to convince you to prevent you from interacting with them. Ask them what worked for them. How did they see the change? And that will be formative in itself, and it will allow you to understand if that experience is going to be useful to you or not. So next time that your vegan friend tells you that veganism is the shit, ask them why. Ask them what has bring them to their lives, and just be curious about it. Same thing with your keto people, and then don't even let them convince you otherwise, because you know better. But use that information to your advantage. That is it. I hope you enjoyed this.